Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm sure most of you know that this is number 3 in a series, but we did do a number 0 too. So I think this is the 4th Stoa session that we've hosted as part of kind of our evolving gown community and project. I am your facilitator today, and wanted to kind of quickly thank Peter for giving me the keys to the kingdom in some sense. I guess both in a lot of our past ones, we gave more expanded self-intros, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jared Janes. I'm been kind of in the meta intellectual Stoa atmosphere for quite a few years, but then went pretty deep down the meditation rabbit hole. So that's where my focus has been for the past couple of years, or predominantly my focus has been there in the past couple of years, and specifically moving more into Vajrayana practice. And so that's largely what we're going to be covering here. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything else that's super relevant for me or at this moment, but I think I've given different intros every time. So if you went back to those, then you've probably seen different aspects of who I thought I was at the time. But yeah.
Oh, thanks, Jared. Yeah. Another short intro from me as well. I'm a Vajrayana practitioner. I'm Charlie Awbery. I'm interested in what Vajrayana has to offer that's distinct to other practices and traditions that we've inherited here, Eastern and Western ones as well. I do think that Vajrayana does have distinct value. In particular, I think is a life-affirming, worldly-oriented practice. At least in Evolving Ground, we're emphasizing that worldview. Vajrayana combines a variety of perspectives and stances and attitudes, and many of those I think can be very individually supportive and helpful, and also socially, which is somewhat connected to our topic today. A little bit about Evolving Ground. We're establishing a community of practice there. That is a community of contemporary Vajrayana practice. So these sessions with the Stoa, they're in some sense, they're laying out the foundations in terms of our particular approach, the approach that we're taking to learning and to practice and to community. So I think that's all I want to say as an introduction.
Cool. Yeah. And maybe just kind of talking a bit about the community. So the first Stoa session that we hosted was kind of the thing that kind of decided for us that this was something that we should try and do. And so that was like 4 months, 6 months, I don't know, somewhere around there. So right after that session, we set up a way for people to just fill out a form and join a Slack server and get to know or to kind of compare their contemplative experience with what we're talking about, Vajrayana, and both from a historical perspective, we're quite practice oriented, so kind of very, very experiential, what's happening in your experience, and some philosophizing. We got a lot of big brains in our Slack as well, so we're not afraid of using them from time to time. And shortly after we launched, we created a few different levels of engagement. So anybody can join that fills out the form, but we have had a few people that opted for kind of more personalized engagement. So we have a group of pupils who are working hard to kind of really deliberately understand Vajrayana, going through books, approaching certain topics like the ones we're covering today in a little bit smaller groups, and talking a lot about individual practice and getting feedback in a kind of relational way. And then we have a smaller group of apprentices who we're also working with one-on-one. And right now we're managing all that on our Patreon page, which will eventually be replaced by a website, but kind of was the minimum viable launch product. So evolvingground.org is our kind of home base. And right now it points to that Patreon, and you can see some of the descriptions of those different roles of involvement and things like that. And we're actually just opened up a few more slots for a new cohort of pupils and apprentices now that we've started to kind of establish some community norms and have some idea of what newcomers would expect to both from our expectations and their expectations and everything like that. So we're starting to establish some of the ground of evolving ground, I guess.
We're evolving the ground a little bit.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Big emphasis on peer support there as well. So there are peer groups that meet up, and there's opportunities for people to meet up to practice together or to talk together, talk about practice together, go meta. So that's working very well. We're very happy with how that's going.
Indeed. So yeah, today, I guess just a quick outline on what the agenda is. Charlie's going to give a bit of a presentation on our topic, which is confidence. And then the two of us might riff on some themes a bit, and that related themes and how it might relate into day-to-day experience and things like that. And then we'll open up for some questions. That being said, if questions do come up as we're going through, please do type them in the chat. Todd is going to help us keep an eye on things. And I know that I've seen some of the other STOA sessions kind of a +1 on any of the questions that seem very relevant for you too is a good way for us to kind of see which of the topics are kind of have the most gravity. So that's always appreciated as well. Any questions about format before we launch into the things? Cool. All right, Charlie.
Yeah, confidence. So I'm going to riff on how I perceive confidence in this particular setting, this setting of practice. It's a big topic. It's a very big topic, and we've just got a little time today. We are thinking that eventually each of these topics that are really specifically meaningful in terms of practice and in terms of society and in terms of relation could turn into a whole weekend. So that's just to give you a flavor of how much there is here that we're not going to see. And confidence has many, many meanings. So just today, I wanted to look at a very, very specific, very particular sort of confidence, an experiential, felt sense. I think it's important to talk about this now, actually, at this point in time. It seems like en masse, culturally, we've lost confidence. There's a sense of groundlessness. There's a sense of not knowing. And there's a lot of fear. There's a great deal of fear. And when this happens, you tend to see extremes. You see polarization into anxiety at one end. And then you see people LARPing certainty and confidence at the other end of the extreme. But I think the fear is obvious. You can see the fear. You can taste the fear. It's pervasive. I think it's pervasive at this moment in our culture. And for good reason, you could say. There are many real threats. They're all coming together. And this fear is a lack of basic confidence in the face of dealing with all of this crap that is being thrown at us at the moment, unexpectedly somewhat. LARPing is an interesting thing. I mentioned LARPing. Sometimes I think you can LARP a thing to get closer to it, but not in this instance. That doesn't work here. LARPing certainty doesn't bring you to this kind of confidence that I'm talking about, that I want to invoke. So a few sessions back, a few stoas ago, Jared and I were talking about the move from sutric practice to Buddhist tantric practice, and the differences between the two there. And interestingly, when you approach tantric methods, you're probably going to be having some kind of LARPing of the method before you find the thing itself. That's very characteristic of tantric practice, because the method doesn't click as given. You take a while to move around the form to get to understand what that is. And hopefully you have some help with that as well. But that's because in tantric practice, you're always moving towards form. In sutric practice, that is not the case. And I think that's what we have here. What we're looking at is quite sutric in some senses, and it can be terrifying. Sutric practice can be like that. The renunciative flavor of sutric practice is quite challenging. It can be really terrifying. And this situation that we have here is more sutric, because what's required is that you drop your strategies for dealing. You just drop them. That in Buddhist terms, it's much more about emptiness, finding emptiness experientially, this kind of confidence that we're looking at. So there are different sorts of confidence, different kinds, but there's this very particular sort of confidence. It's a type that I'm going to talk about today. And it's something that we've lost. Individually, we've lost it. Culturally, I think we've lost it because we've forgotten how to be fundamentally okay with uncertainty, with not knowing. We've forgotten about death being always dancing in our faces because we've been in a little bit of a cozy cave for a while. So this confidence, it's the experiential knowledge, it's the basic experience of being fundamentally okay with the threat of insubstantiality, groundlessness, precarity, uncertainty. You're experientially understanding that as the basic condition of life, that is there, that uncertainty is always there, and you're fundamentally okay with it. That's confidence. This isn't to say that it's impossible to have control, to take control of circumstances. Of course, there's usually some possibility of that. What it's about is being at first okay with the impossibility of complete control, the nebulosity of experience. If the only approach is fear-based, if you're trying to get things to change and to work and to keep control of the world, and it's coming from the terror that you're losing grip, then that confidence is going to be elusive. So I think this is really pertinent now, where we find ourselves. It's time to come out of hiding. It's time to face this groundlessness, not look away from it. I mean, after all, it was always there. We don't much have any choice about this. Actually, we have to do this now. It's imperative. So we need to find this kind of confidence, the sort of confidence that keeps you sane when everything else is chaotic and changing and unpredictable. And, that almost sounds like a bit of a cliche, doesn't it? But it is a thing, and we've forgotten how to do that. And when you think about it, it's a little odd that we've forgotten how to be confident in this way, because that's who we are. We're adapted. We're adapted to survive in the face of limited information, of intuitive sensing, of unpredictable environments. We're very, very good at that. That is who we are. We're impermanent. We're always changing. We're moving. We're unpredictable beings. We know that. We know that already. I mean, why would we imagine that there's certainty, that we can have complete control over our lives and over what's happening? Of course we can't. There's always ambiguity. Random shit happens. You know, that's what makes us alive, this ability to adapt creatively to all the random shit that life throws our way. But it can be a little painful, of course. So that's why we like to hide away from all that variety, maybe. Try to game it. Try to keep on top of it all. But to move away from that compulsion to hide, we actually need to find this particular kind of confidence that we're talking about. That's the base. You find it and then you nurture it. You can't develop it. You can't fake it. You can't LARP it. Remember, it's an experience that you're finding. It's not a cognitive kind of knowing. I think the cognitive reinforcement comes later. First, it's about finding, really. And so meditation is a method, or it's one method for finding this felt sense individually. It might not be the only way. I think there are probably other ways, many other ways. But the openness and the connectedness that arises from this particular meditation practice, from opening awareness, leading into spacious presence, this kind of meditation that we're, the kind that we're training in Evolving Ground, that's a very good direct way to find this confidence that we're talking about. We've talked a lot about how to do that already. That's really the first part of the training that we're engaging in. And so when you meditate in this way, there's a sense in which you become close to yourself, not distance. You're not dissociating from the basic experience of being. There's an intimacy. You're intimate. You're becoming intimate with yourself. And just as an aside, if there are any enlightened hats in the room, just forget about no self. It's actually not going to be very helpful in this situation. There's work to be done. So long as you're a living, breathing being yourself, you're moving in relation with other selves and your environment, this isn't a problem. You're continually selfing. There's no need to escape from yourself. You can't anyway. Forget that illusion. It's just an illusion. You know, unless you want to become some kind of unsensing, unfeeling, detached zombie person. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about in this case. This isn't dissociation. There's an immense intimacy here. Here, you're so intimate with your sense fields that you have no trouble understanding the limits of your experience as a sense of being. Now that's who we are. You're not in cloud cuckoo land. You're right here, quite alive. You're quite alive in your presence. You're differentiated and related, both of those, by the sensation of being in the world. And it's okay. It's okay. So meditation familiarizes you with the experience of groundlessness, with that nebulosity and that ambiguity through the process of it's loosening the reliance on referentiality, particularly conceptual referentiality. And by that, I mean referentiality in the form of thought processes, internal narratives, ideation, wish fulfillment, self and relationship stories, all that kind of thing. And this familiarity with being able to rest without referentiality, without the gravitational pull into that kind of narrow filtering of experience, that gives rise to a kind of relief. It's a relief from all that. It's an expansive experience, a loosening up of the stories about how things are. And then in that space, you can very clearly see the anxiety. You see the anxiety and the fear that gives rise to all of that. It's quite simple. It's quite simple. You see that fear and you see all the convolutions that come about from it, and you're okay with that. Once you see that mechanism at work, you're much less driven by it. You can rest there, rest with that awareness, and it's okay. And that's where you discover that felt sense, that experiential confidence. It's the knowledge. It's the knowledge that comes from intimacy with your own experience. You're fundamentally okay with how you are. You're basically okay with your experience of being in the world. You can handle it. You know you can handle it because you're here right now doing just that. So being fundamentally okay about uncertainty, about nebulosity, about constant change, all of that, that is to experience confidence. And that is because it's the nature of who you are. This connection at the felt level, it's very important because you're connecting with that precarity and with that vulnerability. You're discovering your natural condition as a felt sense. That's where the okayness comes from. There's nowhere else. Nowhere else to go. You're right there. You're right here. You discover it as an expansive, very fresh. It's a very fresh place to be. That could be quite unexpected. It's expansive and fresh because you just kind of popped out of your cave of referentiality and you discovered it was okay to relax. You opened the door a bit. So discovering this confidence, finding that you're basically okay with your natural condition, you know, finding what that is, finding what that is like. That could be the most important thing in your life. So I think I'd like to talk a little bit about how that could easily become mistaken or become misinterpreted. So this isn't a project. When your self is a project, there's always somewhere else to go and there's always something else to do. And now there's nowhere else to go. There's nothing else to do. That could be a terrifying prospect, but it could also be a relief just to sit, even for a few minutes to begin with. Also, I think when you're no self or when you're enlightenment or, you know, whatever it is, when that is a project, there's this idea there. You're actually wanting to get away in some sense, to be honest. If you're after enlightenment or if you're after this some kind of certainty in a way, you're looking for something else. So you can drop that idea. You could just drop that and stay here instead. This isn't a project. So it's not a project. What is it? It's a relationship. I think it's a relationship. You're getting to know yourself as you are. And like with any relationship, you may be a bit kind of shy at first, maybe. There's some vulnerability there. Maybe a bit like you're making a new friend. Another way that this could be mistaken is that there's no therefore. There's no therefore in this experience, this particular experience of confidence. It's not a justification of anything. It can't justify anything. There's no justification to be had. It's not a cognitive justification. Oh, I'm okay, so I can eat the pie, or, you know, I'm okay, so I can ignore that person. Or I'm okay, I'm fundamentally okay, so I can do what I want. I'm okay, so, you know, my behavior must therefore be okay. It's nothing like that. That's not what we're talking about here. There's no therefore. There's no follow on. There's no fixed follow on. There's no predictable follow on. This experience of confidence is all about, it's much more about knowing who you are. It doesn't make everything okay in the world, in your circumstances. It's not some kind of Pollyanna-ish kind of naive belief that everything's going to be okay. Of course it won't. I mean, everything isn't going to be okay. And you're going to die anyway. I mean, you're okay with that. That's the starting point, the starting point. That's the base. It's where we're at. That's how things are now. Everything is not okay. And you have the personal felt knowledge. You have the fundamental experience of being okay with that. And you can step up to it. You understand that the world is on the verge of some kind of crisis in multiple domains. We can see this. and you're not panicking. We're not panicking. It's this opportunity to find the creative energy and the basic sanity to deal with this situation. And, you know, I think that's maybe another topic for another day, how there's this kind of very natural unfolding from this confidence, which ends up with a very powerful, very directed, creative activity. Now that's tantric practice, that's Vajrayana method, but we're not there yet. We're not talking about that today. It does come very naturally after this base, this experience. So another thing that that can be misunderstood about this is, you know, there's no. But what if I'm fundamentally a bad person? Yeah, a lot of people, so many people have this sense of helplessness or worthlessness that's somehow pervasive these days. I really feel that, this sense that, you know, a lot of people have a felt sense of just not being up to it, not being good enough, not being worthy in some sense. This is a real problem in the aggregate. It's a real problem. It's an obstacle to getting stuff done. It's a real obstacle to having a robust, functioning society at the moment. This actually matters a lot. People, you know, a lot of people have said to me, I feel worthless. How can I be fundamentally okay with myself when I actually just don't feel that way? I've heard that a lot of times, so many times. So look, just as there's no justification, there's also no judgment. You just experience who you are, maybe for the first time since you were a baby. There's no cognitive interference there. That's where this meditation can lead, or, you know, other forms of just dealing, just resting. It could feel like you're a baby at first, very open, very vulnerable, without the protection of all that referentiality. And that's why there's this this tenderness. There's a tenderness there, and there's a friendliness. You're seeing yourself. You're seeing yourself very fresh, just like a baby. Like a baby, you know, baby isn't morally good or bad. That's just the natural condition. We don't agree or disagree with nature. That just doesn't make any sense at all. It's just as it is. But, you know, so often it comes up. You know, people say to me and Jared when we're chatting, like, how can I trust that I'm not going to go wrong, or that it's not all going to collapse, or that I'm going to be okay, that I'm going to do okay for others around me? These are real fears. They're real. You know, they're not going to disappear overnight. There are no guarantees that things aren't going to go wrong either. But this experience that I'm talking about, it's not about behavior and activity yet. It's always impossible to have all the information. That's just how it's going to be. That's the condition of being sentient. We can only ever have some of the information, you know. There's always going to be unpredictable circumstances. We don't know if we're going to make the right decision or whatever, but we're coming from a base of just being okay with that. So anyway, today, mostly, I just wanted to introduce that possibility. That's the way that that opening awareness can just begin to take effect in meditation, and then in your life and in your general experience. That's the ground. It's establishing the base. And that's what we're doing. There's a very natural set of experiences that grow from that ground, from this confidence. It leads to trust. There's a kind of trust, a grounded being. Trust very naturally begins to grow from that, because you can begin to develop trust once you're kind of confidence in that place. Once you have that, you begin to trust your capacity. You trust your capacity to navigate tumultuous precarity, eventually you trust your capacity to do that with some skill and, possibly even with some panache. All of those grow together. Then the fruit of this practice, I think I mentioned this earlier, as it all starts to manifest, as this manifests in your life and in your activity, then the fruit is powerful, energetic creativity, creative action at a social level as well. Very functional relationship, small group relationships, and then socially being functional, confident in that arena. So, once you develop this basic confidence, or find it, I should say, not develop exactly. Once you find it, you nurture it and get more familiar with that, then there's a lot you can do. But the base has to be there first. The familiarity with this spacious, wide, open, undefined nature of being, and the sense that we're fundamentally okay with that. And that probably mostly what I want to say about confidence.
Yeah. Something that was coming up for me, Charlie, is I was trying to, so this confidence we're talking about, another phrase that I put in there that I like, what we're describing is finding security in insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
And in a Buddhist context, we're talking about becoming experientially okay with emptiness. And, we talked a bit about sutra as well. And technically, that the sutra is very interested in doing the same thing in the sense of discovering emptiness. And yet its approach can lead to a little bit more of a rigid discovery of that, or a conditional discovery of that. This is the obvious example is that a lot of sutric practice is done in monasteries where things are safe and you don't have to worry about any kind of insecurities or things like that. And as you were speaking before, like the culture seems to be coming out of a moment of being like, for a long time we felt like everything was, all of our basic needs were met. We could rely on our institutions to take care of us and things like that. So this feels very present right now for me at a cultural moment of and very similarly, like finding emptiness in the midst of insecurity and messiness is
exactly
markedly different.
Yeah, I think so. And we've talked a lot about atomized society and about how do we even deal with this kind of very, very different situation that we have. And a lot of it is about navigation rather than reliance. I think in that kind of very systematized society that we were relying on, that actually just doesn't exist anymore. We've discovered shockingly quickly that our institutions actually don't function anymore. So, we had this kind of reliance on a sort of solid, systematized understanding of how things are, and an expectation that that's how they are. And I think we have to move beyond that in some sense to deal with it. There's much more of a sense of navigation, of some sense of reconstruction, maybe out of the debris. We're going to have to be doing a lot of that. And maybe it's a lot more about building temporary structures that are good enough, and moving between, both at individual levels and social level as well. Figuring out how to do that.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
And I do think the fundamental okayness we're talking about is the empty part of the equation. And like you mentioned before, sometimes that can sound, the therefore move is seeing this as some sort of rationalization or justification for inaction or something like that. But really, from my perspective, I kind of look at it in the sense of, maybe like combat sports, right? Like if somebody has a stance that is open and receptive and not from a place of fear and ready to include anything that's going to be thrown at them, their capacity to act congruently is going to be marketably more available, and yet never guaranteed though, right? That's the kicker.
Right, right.
So yeah, while
And
this does
yeah,
sound, I think in some sense it can sound passive. It's like the passivity or the openness that is required for effective action.
it's the base.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think so. It's the base for effective action. And there's a sense in which, because of the situation that we're in now, culturally and globally, there's inevitably going to be a sense of meta systematicity as well, a sense of being able to have some kind of overview and then dive in and then understand the functionality, understand the principle of how things have stopped working, and be able to find how that can be reshaped in some way. I think we start practicing this at an individual level as well, in relationships, in our practice, then that is providing that kind of that sort of perspective that is going to be necessary, I think.
Yeah. Did you want to? Only the thing that I was thinking is, do we want to talk a bit about the specifics? I know we on the method that we're talking about as establishing this foundation. I know we've covered it before in some of our past sessions as well. The practice of Shine is what is the primary sitting practice that we're talking about, or opening meditation is another kind of synonymous term that we're using. Did you want to go more into that? Or I know we have had a few questions that have popped up that we could jump on as well.
Yeah, I think we've got quite a lot about Shine and about opening awareness in resources available. So if anybody is wanting to take a look at that personally, head over to the website or contact us, and we'll make sure that you've got what you need for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's take a look what's going on with the questions here.
Todd, anything? Did you want to help us do some filtering?
Well, there's been a lot of good discussion in chat. Not a ton of questions. The one I've got marked out here is there are two that have come up. There was one question initially around just a description of what you guys are talking about in terms of renunciative electric view. And I think we've covered that in other discussions, and I'm trying to say a few words about that just to clarify that might help.
Yeah, so you cut out a bit, but the clarification on the renunciative worldview, is that what it was?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, could you say the question again?
Well, Karen, did you want to go ahead and ask the question? It was yours. Did I cut out again? Sorry.
No.
Yeah, I was going to say that perhaps Karen could re-ask the question. That she was the one that put it in chat initially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just unmute
Karen,
yourself
if you want to, or somebody can ask on your. Oh, cool.
I didn't ask a question, I think. I didn't.
Oh, okay. Do we have the wrong?
Perhaps.
Give it another go, Todd. Yeah.
I just reposted the.
Okay, cool. Let's have a look.
Oh, renunciative for beginners. Yeah, I put in a note here. No problem. The most common connotation that I think, like Western connotation or translation, would be kind of like abstinence, abstaining from engaging with certain aspects of life, whether that's sex or meat or relationships or any of the above. In the frame of Buddhism, it's like largely the things that are renounced are the form aspects of experience, or the activity aspects of experience or sensation, as we were talking about before. If there are any arhats, like that, they genuinely are kind of but disconnected in some fundamental way from emotions and the body, being an individual in the world.
Mm-hmm. So renunciation is one of the principles which you can work with. There are many different methods, and for a method to function, it has a principle by which it works, a mechanism, and a result or a outcome or intended, desired effect. That is the principle with which you're working leads to an effect. So one of the principles with which you can work is renunciation. And it's in the whole field of Buddhism that renunciative principle is associated with a sutric style of Buddhism. The path of sutra is very broad because there are, you can divvy that up again into different paths, different methods, and different styles of renunciation. But a lot of what people encounter when they first encounter meditation practice or Buddhism in some form or other, or secularized Buddhism as well, mindfulness, whatever, a lot of that is coming from a heritage of renunciative practices. And historically, those would have been socially evolving around a monastic principles. You would have a lot of monasteries where that would be the place where practitioners, monks, nuns would go to practice renunciation, if you like. So in some sense, it's a renunciation of society in that context. And in an individual context, as a practice, often it's well, it depends. I mean, it depends whether you take it as a life practice, in which case, like Jared was saying, there's renunciation of, it's a minimalization. It's getting things purer and less interfering so that you can actually just kind of eventually clear your mind. And there are lots of different types of renunciation, different styles of renunciative practice. But how this relates to the confidence issue is that it's almost like kind of turning renunciation on its head, turning the principle on its head a little bit, because what you're renouncing is your very strong desire to just go straight towards the safety thing. Just go immediately towards, the familiarity of that kind of cave of safety. And one way of doing that is to just pretend that what's happening isn't happening. I'm just going to carry on completely normally. I'm just going to do my little thing as is. I won't engage. I'll just, and the walls are just going to come closer and closer and closer. So, yeah, sorry, Jared, that this idea that we're renouncing in this sense, we're renouncing that way of having been, that sort of assumption that everything's going to just be provided and sorted and okay,
Yeah, I'm thinking about, like, on the cushion, how is this, like, what does this mean, right? Like, experientially. And one of the big things, so I practiced a kind of more sutric form of meditation that is kind of, in some ways, the Sanskrit word for it is the same. So shine is just Tibetan for shamatha. And shamatha, most of the shamatha methods that we encounter kind of predominantly are based in some sutric method and view. And in the sutric presentation, we rely a lot on concentration. And concentration means that you're immediately creating a separation in your experience to say that this is the part of experience that is okay for me to engage with and to include, and everything else needs to be excluded in some way. If you can't do that heavy-handedly, obviously it takes a bit of tact, but the result of that type of practice is that a lot of things that are commonly available in your experience, like the sense of your emotions or your body or maybe your surroundings and things like that, become less and less present and kind of down-regulated. And that can become habitual to the point where you become more and more focused on this part of your experience that is okay. And it's kind of a place to find refuge. in Shine, there is no distinction. There's no such thing as a distraction. It's including everything in your experience, and everything, and it's not what we call is it's called remaining uninvolved with what is coming up in your experience. And that remaining uninvolved is different in the sense that there is always a possibility for engagement, and it's not becoming less clear and more pushed away. It's becoming actually more vivid. And yet we learn what it's like to not have to conceptualize and reify a certain perspective on our experience or something like that, and just allow everything to be. And this is very much connected, I think, to the life affirming aspect of this practice as a base, and how it differs from the renunciative view. I know, I think, Evan, you had a question about what was it? Confidence not be scaffolded, or I don't remember what the exact message was.
Yeah, a lot water has gone under the bridge, so other things have come up, but perhaps I should just stay with that. When that question arose, Charlie, at least as I received it here, you seem to imply, so I suppose I'm confused, I'm seeking clarification. You seem to imply that confidence couldn't be done somehow. I forget, it's a long way in the rearview mirror how you described it, but there was something you said that brought that question for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I can stay with that in the interest of clarity. There are a couple other things that came up. What's your preference?
Let's stay with that and then move on to the other things after. Yeah. I would love to hear you say more about how confidence could be done.
Part of the answer is I don't know. That's why I'm here. But by way of trying to answer, you're drawing me out. I would say that given the circumstances we're in, yes, from the perspective of some, a lot of shitty stuff is happening, but from the perspective of others, quite possibly there's great stuff that's happening.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
And so I've come to, and I don't believe it's a mere rationalization of things. I do feel it reaches into a deeper level, but the 4 years of this current presidency, which we hope, many of us hope will come to a peaceful end, has been this huge spotlight on opportunity for example, from the perspective of this candy wrapper that happens to be darker skinned, it's like, oh, under the previous administration, we thought we had reached a so-called post-racial society. And then we see that no, under this current administration, there are perennial
Mm-hmm.
themes that
Mm-hmm.
that ebb and flow
Mm-hmm.
on and on. So it's, I don't know if that bleeds onto the terrain of confidence, but it's having that perspective has allowed me to say, you know, in terms of my, at this basic one, you know, individual point of view, oh, what's the opportunity to, yes, the perhaps cliched phrase, deepen my practice, because it is an opportunity, because it's, you know, we thought it was over here, but now it's right here.
Right.
So I go through this cycle of forgetting, oh, it's an opportunity, then remembering, and I go in and out of, let's say, more constructively working with the groundless ground that this current situation is the opportunity for. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but I do think it does point towards something, at least from my point of view,
Mm-hmm.
this point of view, that, oh, okay, being like a hunter gatherer, what can I use here? And since you were, the title of this talk is, the theme is confidence. Okay, what can I use to quote unquote scaffold my confidence, or to, the alchemical metaphor is, what is the dross or the lead that can be transformed into gold? Or can it,
yeah.
is it a doing or an undoing? Is it a letting go, or,
First, so first, I think it's an undoing. First, it's a letting go. And then that gives rise to the doing. And these things are always, I think they're always inseparable in some sense, but the base that you find is the not doing. The confidence is, so in Buddhist terms, we're talking about confidence as emptiness, like the experience of emptiness. So in your practice, in your sitting, in your relationship, whatever, the spaciousness is where the confidence is found, is in the spacious aspect of experience, and that is the not doing. And then that very naturally gives rise to congruent, effective, there's much more space to see there. So the doing is the scaffolding. The confidence isn't, the confidence is the base, the foundation. The activity is, the capacity to interject, to interrelate, to find appropriate activity.
Sorry, could you repeat that phrase again? I'm sorry.
The doing itself grows out of the confidence, which is your base. The doing is the capacity to find congruent interjection, scaffolding, building, make stuff happen, whatever. So that is like the practice, the path, the method. But first of all, to have an effective practice, to have an effective activity, because that is, Buddhist Tantra is effective action, basically. That's the method. So the base for that is confidence and finding this confidence. I think there are other sorts of confidence that you can sort of work at and develop in some way, but this one is much more a kind of, it's finding, because that thing is actually sort of already there in some sense.
And the big difference for me too is that finding is great because, like we said, if you can discover this spaciousness in your experience, the interesting thing about spaciousness is that it's always the same, right? And it's always reliably in experience to be found. Whereas if we do not have that base, or if we're not secure in that space, then when we're working with creating something or discovering something or learning about something, a philosophy or something like that, a lot of that process is looking to find security from it. And that means that you're wanting to make it rigid and solid and everlasting. And as we know, everything's kind of temporary. And so it kind of creates it calcifies it in the sense that it can no longer be a living, creative expression. And then when it does fall apart, we then have lost our security or something like that. But as we're building things, there can be this sense of confidence that you get from seeing results, getting more fluency and skillfulness with how we do that. And yet, if we're looking at it for it to be permanent, a permanent place of security, then then we're acting from fear.
I think I want to check back with Evan, and does what Jared and I have been saying, does that relate to your experience anyway? The other thing I want to just acknowledge as well is that, you're absolutely right. There is always this, there's always good stuff, there's always bad stuff, there's a whole spectrum. I mean, that's the nature of experiences, that there's a spectrum. So, I want to acknowledge that, it's not all bad. So we're just kind of leaning into this emphasis of social disintegration in some way and social change and the felt experience of that. But, yeah.
Yeah, and so in touching upon that, I feel I've come to understand it's important here that and I'm not saying this is what you did in your talk, but I know it in my response to your talk, what can happen here is a sort of over pathologizing of the current situation, and then falling into a spiral of the brain gets primed to receive things, the nervous system gets primed to receive things in a certain way, and the self-preservation network or radar is, overtaxed. And sure, if we pay too much attention to the news or find ourselves, walking by a demonstration where the other side is antagonistic to ours, then, it's right there. So try not to lose the thread, but yeah, it does resonate. I've just found in my experience over time, it's very easy to forget, that the possibility for confidence, as you say, is always there, is available, is accessible, because it's all too easy, especially, they've been serving us a banquet of, of things that, easily we can ingest and collapse into, lack of, not seeing that possibility or forgetting that possibility ever even existed.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for putting it like that. I think that's just puts it beautifully. Yeah.
Which part, the banquet or just as a whole?
Yeah, the banquet. I like the banquet metaphor. Yeah.
So we're being served this buffet, and we can perhaps, to tenuously try to draw that metaphor out, we can look at the buffet and see what's on offer, and we can say, oh, I'm not going to eat that, or maybe I'm going to see its color and its smell and take a little taste and say, oh wow, that's what that provokes in me. Or we can just say, oh, there's all this shit on offer and that's all there is, and I'm just going to shovel it down because I have to eat, right? I can't forego any of that because that's what the buffet is, right? So it's this feeling, I think it's more than an idea, that it's possible not to just, slather yourself in the buffet and just say it's a fucking food fight of shit food. That perhaps, if you want to call it a stepping back, I don't know.
Nicely put. Yeah. You said you had a couple of other questions that occurred later, or ponderings.
I wonder, Charlie, we have quite a few questions. Maybe we could.
Oh, we got a lot, have we?
A couple, or we have a few other for sure, just to make space. I know the other Evan McMullen, you had one.
Sure, yeah, let me scroll back up to it. Thanks. So my question was essentially that, as I know you guys are aware, it's very commonly spoken of that tantric practice can be dangerous in certain senses, and this definitely meshes with my own experience of the territory. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about what sort of social structures, organizational structures, and other supports you think are most likely to lead to Westerners being able to practice Tantra in a way that has a decent risk to reward profile. I know it can't be safe, nothing's safe, but I know that you're engaged with this project, and I'm curious as to what insights you might have gleaned so far.
Yeah, very much. I mean, that's kind of what we're all about in some sense. So thank you for the question. We are, I think we're frustratingly slow in some ways. A lot of people are sort of, very eager for this to happen because it's exciting, it's exciting, the potential to bring tantric, contemporary tantric forms into being, methods, and we do, we're at the talking about stage quite a lot. But so Jared and I, we've talked so much about this, and we continue to, to take great care and to intentionally hold back while we establish the base of a community and an organization, a structure. And so a lot of the way that we're approaching this, and maybe Jared can speak more to this too, but a lot of the intent here is that the base that we're providing is a really, really good, solid base in practice, particularly Shine practice, but other meditations, other practices. We're working a lot at the moment on a one-to-one basis with individuals, because we feel that, so we've got pupils, we have apprentices, we feel that first of all, before we start looking at the structures for tantric practice in a different context, we actually need to have a really good, solid group of people who know each other very well, who are, well bonded, who are peers. We're all peers in terms of practice, and are in a place where that base is already provided, and then we can start looking at the principle of the practices that come from Tantra and of other Vajrayana paths. We take the principle, we understand from experience. So I think that is the really important thing. It's not possible to represent or remanifest tantric practice without having already had some experiential sense of the effect and the method and the result in some way. And to just kind of go in there and to pull things out and say, oh wow, wouldn't it be great to do this and to do that or whatever, which is very tempting. Of course, it's, we want to do that because we have all these ideas. It's lovely, but we really want to make sure that we have the experience, the experiential base there. Anything else to say about that, Jared?
Yeah, well, the first thing that came up too is one of the, so we talked about this kind of relational group foundation as well as being key. And something that I've noticed, especially because I've been involved with a lot of different spiritual communities, mostly of the Western kind of adaptations, speaking to some of the renunciative view and kind of language and social norms and things like that. The most distinct flavor of our community, the Evolving Ground community, is that we really are embracing difference and disagreement and different perspectives and challenging presumptions and not reifying responses, and so instead of looking for some sort of like kind of top-down cohesion or sameness from all of our practitioners, that the difference is really important, and we really see that being equally important for tantric practice, because tantric practice is dealing with form, and form is different. It's different from each perspective, and so just another way in which having that Vajrayana view from a foundation is going to lead to a different type of community as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and speaking directly to that, there's there's a lot about the community itself learning how to support each other as well. So there's a big emphasis on that. There's a learning curve in terms of the people who are kind of regularly involved, becoming more involved, actually being there as support for new people coming in, getting some community norms there. It's really very intentional as well, providing that support structure, like Evan was saying earlier, scaffolding. In a way, you were providing that scaffolding for practice, for exploration, for experimentation in some sense, and making it possible for people to kind of feel their way around practices and get to understand what they are in a safe environment. So yeah, there's that.
Charlie, I thought it might also be interesting. I know you've had a few times where you talk about there can be some common connotations when the phrase tantric practice is dangerous, comes up, and I think usually that is pointing to the danger associated with psychophysical disruptions and maladies and things like that. But there's another type of danger that I thought you might want to speak of, just the danger of our sacred cows dissolving.
The danger of what?
Our sacred cows dissolving. The security.
A good danger. That's kind of a good danger in a sense. I mean, there are various failure modes, which is very different to saying there are challenges and dangers and threats to one's kind of challenges to one's own practice or development or whatever. So looking at failure modes as one thing, there are very typical ways in which tantric practice can fail. And I think as we're building community, we've got to be very, very careful about that. One of the classic ones is big narcissistic ego trip type of thing. And if you engage in tantric practice without having the base, which is experiential emptiness, you can get at that base in different ways. You can arrive there. A lot of what I've been talking about today in terms of finding confidence in the tantric environment, that is the base, and it's emptiness. So that is the connection there. It's the base of empty experience, the actual experience of an uncluttered mind in some senses. When you're talking about the mental experience, the relationship to environment as being quite spacious in some sense. A lot of ways of talking about this, but yeah, the tantric method can kind of go awry if you don't have that really good understanding and experience. So it's both. It's the understanding of how it can go wrong, and it's the experience of emptiness as well. You need that. Another way that Jared picked up on was the big interest in psychophysical exercises, and it's very appealing to want to go straight for that, and it's very easy to explode when you do that as well. We've all heard about things like that happening. So yeah. But in terms of danger and challenge, in some sense, the challenge of tantric practice is very different. The threat or the challenge to one's sense of the threat is to one's sense of security, to one's sense of certainty, to one's sense of I've got this now. I can handle this now. I've got this method, and it's going to be the way. And now I can see how everything fits into this. Tantra continuously, constantly explodes that certainty. So you've got to be in a good place already for that to happen, a reasonable place. You've got to be aware that that is the way that it's going to work, and willing and ready personally. You've got to feel, yeah, okay, I can take a little bit of that at the moment. So sutric practice has very different challenges, very, very different in a way. It's getting at a different thing. Yeah.
One little, I know Evan, you had a follow up, but one little kind of a little footnote here. We talk a lot about the distinction between sutra and tantra, and it can, I think sometimes it can sound like we're making a huge value judgment here, but really we're kind of coming at it more from the principle of practice and the path that we're on, and the results of it, and understanding that. And Vajrayana, creates the possibility of using any of these principles, whether it's tantra, sutra, or dzogchen. It's just whatever is appropriate. And again, the spaciousness is quite a valuable thing to have enough of a broad enough view to know what if renunciation is a proper method to employ at this certain time, or if it's transformation, or if we get into dzogchen, it would be there's a bit of another flavor, but we won't open up that can of worms.
Yeah, and there's this sense that we're emphasizing the difference as well. Emphasize the difference between the paths. The reason for that is that it makes it more apparent how method functions differently, and you need to know that to be confident about what you're engaging with. So a lot of what we're doing in Evolving Ground is training that understanding of principle and understanding of function as different, because that's actually very useful in terms of individual practice and in terms of relating to peers who are practicing, maybe, you know, entering new practices or whatever. So we're doing a lot of that. And it's very successful, you know, people are doing that well. It's lovely, you know, appreciate it.
So I did have a quick follow-up, if that's okay. Something that's been really alive for me, you know, looking back on the paths that I've taken and where I'm going and what other people seem to be looking for and wanting. You know, for one, I deeply appreciate your work and people in a sort of similar cluster of clarifying the methods, bases, you know, this sort of framework. We are in the world of form, emphasizing those differences of form. If people had been doing that more publicly, you know, years ago, it would have saved me a lot of time. So very much appreciate all the work you guys are doing. And on that note, one of the sort of semi-stable attractors you see in traditions, not just Buddhist, that deal with this sort of material is the sort of like layered model of, you know, the exoteric, the mesoteric, the esoteric, the sort of layered container model. And I personally tend to be pretty deeply allergic to hierarchy and stratification, but I also find myself more and more understanding why that sort of structure tends to emerge. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that sort of thing and, you know, ideas of secrecy versus openness and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a really good question. I mean, we're very much taking the approach that natural hierarchies emerge in different contexts, in different landscapes, you know. If you use the landscape metaphor, I quite like that, because you have many mountains, you have many valleys, you have many routes of exploration, and there's not kind of one single, you know, leading towards one sort of fixed structure. So understanding that the structures of practice are not fixed in that sense, and that there is more of a topology of practice. You know, this is actually a very nicely Vajrayana way to go about things, because you don't have a kind of fixed stage prescriptive progression. It's very much individually oriented, very, very much individually oriented. So one individual's route through the network of practices is going to be radically different to another's, and that's fine. There's no prescriptive path. The path itself is an individual path in that sense. And on that path, there are going to be different people who have expertise in different areas or whatever, who are going to be in natural relationship to that practitioner as they're engaging with that practice. And so we're very much like, yeah, we want that fluidity of path there as well. We're doing our best not to prescribe an organizational path as well. So even though we have created these involved roles of being a pupil, being an apprentice, you could go straight into apprenticeship. You could move from apprenticeship to being a pupil. You could move in and out or whatever. And there's no sense of expectation that you would go one way or another way or whatever. There's no obligation or expectation there at all. And, you know, people come and go from the community too. We've been going for like, I don't know, even less than 6 months. And it's really lovely to have people sort of moving in and out, and feeling okay to do that, you know, feeling fine with that fluidity. So yeah, good question. Thank you. Thank you.
And also add like one other little note there too, is that, you know, speaking of the individual nature of practice, a lot of what we do, especially in one-on-ones and in the smaller group sessions, ends up being talking about like, yeah, we all have our kind of formal practice, but you know, what types of things in your life are you engaged with, and how can we start to incorporate these directly into whatever you're doing, whether it's organizational design or art or science or anything. And so a huge emphasis on immediately making the connection to day-to-day experience, informal scenarios is really big. And a lot of what we talk about, you know, sometimes the formal practice is just a few minutes, and then we spend the rest talking about how that's manifesting in a relationship or something. All right. Todd, I think, did you say the next, who's next on our question queue?
Yeah, I tried to order them a bit here. I think we got Doriel. He had a couple of +1s. This goes back a little bit. It was asking about intuition. Doriel, do you want to ask that one?
Sure. Thanks, Todd and Charlie and Jared. My question is, how does intuition interact with confidence? Does it manifest as following your intuition, but being okay with a lack of certainty over the outcomes? And I guess more broadly, like, what does intuition look like as it develops through practice and through being in this type of spiritual context?
Yeah, I think there's a relationship there. There's a relationship between the way that we go about practice as well. You know, there's a lot of kind of fine tuning around a particular practice, or a lot of method in Vajrayana from Dzogchen perspective. The method is finding congruent fit. And to find congruent fit, both in terms of your practice or in terms of your activity, your daily life or whatever, to find that congruent fit, you're going to have that's a gradual process that you become more and more adept at being able to do. So when you're starting out with tantric practice, you maybe have your shine practice and you have one other practice and you're getting to know that practice, whatever, then you don't, just in that very specific context, you're not moving around between lots of practices and knowing them all and knowing what's going to work where or whatever. That is something that's going to take years to build up very naturally. And in the same way, that intuition, I think, is kind of mirrored in life circumstances as well. Like, you know, suppose you go into a new business setting and that's your new job or whatever, you're not going to have readily available, more likely you're not going to have readily available all of the intuitive understanding of how this relates to that and how you're going to move around between, you know, how does that person relate to things? How does that boss do things? You know, how does this all fit together? What is it? There's a lot to learn often when you go into a brand new situation. And then over time, you develop more understanding of how the forms of things fit together. And then your intuition about how to be creative with that situation comes from that. So in the same way with confidence, you're first of all building that kind of base, and then you're moving into different situations, and you may or may not have a lot of experience in those situations, but intuition, I think, is something that you gradually gather around familiarity in context. It's always contextual. There's always this kind of contextual navigation, and the more that you understand a context, the better you can exercise intuition within it.
I also think something that's coming up for me is that often, so you know, navigating between circumstances, let's say, where there's a presented problem and you're getting ready to take an action, and maybe, you know, in that moment it seems like, oh, I could approach this in a very systematic or kind of rational point of view, or I could do it from an artistic point of view. The experiential, or maybe, and then maybe there's 5 others or something like that that are in the periphery or part of the equation. The experiential familiarity with nebulosity can also give you, I like intuition, the name intuition, because it can kind of give you a general sense that's specific of how each of these models relate to each other and which ones are overlapping and which ones have more gravity or which don't. If you get too much into this conceptual thing where you're looking at it's like a mathematical problem of choosing A, B, C, D, it becomes very kind of disconnected. And then as soon as you find one, you're kind of contained completely in it. You can't fluidly move between others or take influences from others and everything like that. So it's like just the experiential kind of familiarity with vagueness and subtle overlaps and relationships can give rise to that, what feels like intuition. But yeah, it kind of almost like sailing is a good example, kind of feeling where the wind is going, and not being, not thinking that you have to head in one very specific direction or not. Who we got next, Todd?
We've got a couple from Tyler I'd like us to get to, but first I see we've got some +1s for Karen. She had a question from a while ago around confidence being a given. Karen, did you want to go ahead and ask that one?
Yeah, it's basically, I think I wrote, if confidence is a given when you've seen the light.
It's not fixed. It's not fixed. So you can become more familiar, I think. And the more familiar, the more it might experientially kind of feel like, yeah, this is just there. This is just, my experience. So that could be, in some sense, that could feel like it's just a given. Yeah. But it's not, how do I say, it's not something that you can necessarily assume is always going to be there. It's not like once you've found it, that's it, and it's always there. It's like, it, and you can kind of, sometimes you find it, sometimes you lose it. And as you become more and more familiar, then it comes to be more of your regular experience, you could say, I guess. Does that speak to the question? Is that what you had in mind?
I will say, I like it's common for us, I think, when we're answering questions, it's like we always end up in this, well, it depends, or well, not always, or well, which can be frustrating in some ways. And that kind of speaks to the gradual kind of changing relationship with experience and relationships and everything that how we move through the world. And yet I also do think, Karen, there are moments like that, those seeing the light moments, there can be switches which do radically kind of open up something that wasn't there before, and kind of build a momentum or a familiarity, a background familiarity. So there are there's a gradual component, but there is also sudden experience as well. But even the sudden experiences, the afterglow or the residual pattern tends to evolve over time eventually, even if it is kind of a good boost or a kick in certain direction, or the awareness of something, an experience that becomes more stable.
Okay, can I say something? Yes, because maybe you can assume, or maybe some kind of illusion of that confidence is a natural state, and that if you're not confident, then there's something wrong with you. And your answers, they apply to the fact that no, it's not natural to be confident all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I just thought about fear. When you have fear, well, you could actually be confident and fearful at the same time, but there are certain challenges to the confidence in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think being okay with the fear, feeling the fear, sensationally, actually being there with the sensation of fear is what the confidence is in some sense. It's, those two are very, very much mingled. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that thing about, doing it right and doing it wrong, I think that comes up a lot. And you know, trying to let go of the idea that you've got it right or that you're not doing it right or whatever. That's kind of important, you know, just it's great when you found it, when you found that experience. That's wonderful. You know that, and you know that it's available then as well. And you know, because it's an experience, that it's not always going to be there, and that's just natural. So it's not like you're doing it right or doing it wrong. It's that there's a sense that finding it is useful and helpful and whatever. Once you know it, it's like, yeah, you know, it's like when you get kind of, you found a new food that's really great and you think, yeah, I know that thing now. I didn't know that before. I love it. I'm going to have that sometimes. And, you know, maybe I could even have it every day because it's so great, but, you know, maybe.
Yeah, it's interesting. The thing that's coming up for me personally is like it discovering that security in insecurity, touching it kind of completely, even if it is temporary, it just kind of redefines the territory. All of a sudden, the territory is so much larger. You know, so my example here is that I grew up. I had a bunch of stomach issues, so I just like always had indigestion and just discomfort, and it was just like this was the normal, and that would vary from sometimes it would be extreme and sometimes it would be moderate or whatever. And then in my early 20s, I like did some experimentation with diets and found this diet that all of a sudden I was able to experience what it was like to not have any stomach discomfort, and it was kind of like mind blowing because I was like, oh my god, I didn't know there was a zero. Like the fact that the spectrum goes that far, it just remapped the whole territory, and so many more things became available, and so much more more space to navigate, and ways of judging my experience and everything like that, and just knowing that it could be okay, or you know, there could be no discomfort. It just radically changed things. Maybe in a similar way on the opposite spectrum, I've had some kidney stones, and those redefined what pain is for me. I was like, oh wow, okay, this is there's a lot more severe aspects of pain, and that kind of changed my relationship to some of the things that before might have been quite extreme or something like that. Yeah, I don't know, but those moments can be quite they can be kind of figure ground reversal, you know, kind of like very, very drastic expansions and possibilities. Charlie, I know we're at 90 minutes.
Well,
did you want to start
yeah.
wrapping up here? And usually we stay for afterwards for like kind of bonus questions. So I know there's still some lingering things out there.
I can see there's some questions. There's a raised hand. Yeah, let's do that. I think it's long enough for a recorded video. Yeah. Hello to our future listeners. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Yeah. A couple quick notes. Okay, let's see here. Again, thanks to Peter. The STOA is run on a generosity model, so thestoa.ca at the bottom, you can find a way of contributing what you feel if you're feeling generous and want to support the project. And yeah, if you want to learn anything more about us, evolvingground.org is the place to go. And I'm sure that will constantly be changing. Right now, I'll send you to the Patreon, and there is a link to the forum to join the Slack channel. And then once you get in there, you'll see we have a lot of different possibilities of how to engage and what you're interested in. So see you soon.